Oh man, GOB, we did it. This is the last lesson that we've got this year. Alright, so what we're going to do today is we're going to do this very brief little bit about circles, and mainly what we're talking about is the equation of a circle. So, we've talked about the center of a circle and the radius of a circle so far, right? So the center is just the point that's in the middle, right? That's literally what center seems to mean. Right? After that, we've got the radius of a circle, right? It's the distance from the center to the edge of a circle. And then you might remember from geometry A, naming a circle with non-coordinate geometry, right? Just like naming it when it's kind of flying out in space. You name it by the center point. And you do this little piece right over here, right? Where you've got a circle with a dot in the middle representing the center. And then you're naming it by that center point. Right? So for example, if I had a circle, ooh, look at that, perfect, first try. If I had circle C, right, that means that C is the center of my circle there. Okay. You might notice that there's a little bit of new stuff over to the side there, right? We've got an H and a K. There's also an R over here. Right, so the R is nothing new, right? R stands for radius. We've talked about that in the past. The H and the K are a little bit different, right? So before we were talking about points just kind of floating around in space. Now we're talking about them on the coordinate plane, right? So they need coordinates, right? So for the center, we use H and K. H is standing in for the X part of the point, and K is standing in for the Y part, right? So that is just a regular point, X and Y. Right? So the way that we use those is we can do the equation for a circle pretty much like this. It's X minus H in parentheses squared plus Y minus K in parentheses squared equals R squared. So there is that little note there, right? Those negatives, right, X minus H and Y minus K, are going to make H and K look like the opposites of what they actually are, right? It's a little bit easier to see when we get into a problem, which we will do in a second. Right? When you're writing out the equations for these, there's a lot of things that really need to be in the right spots. You need these parentheses all throughout, right? X minus H needs to be in the parentheses, and that squared goes on the outside. Same thing for Y minus K. It's all in parentheses, but that's squared on the outside. The only other thing that we really got to worry about is that we're squaring the radius over here, right? So tricky thing is, right, say that my equation ended with equals 25. Well, 25 is the same thing as 5 squared. That means that 5 would actually be my radius for that, even though it shows up as 25. Right, so don't fall into the trap that I see a lot of people do a lot, right? They think like, oh yeah, equals 25, the 25 is the radius, boom, 25. It's this, we need to take a square root of that sometimes, right? So the radius is equal to the square root of 25 in that case. Right. So let's take a look at an actual problem, right? So there's two main things that we're going to be focusing on, well, I guess like 2.5. Right? But one of them is we're going to focus on how to write the equation given some information. So this first one here, we're going to write the equation of a circle with a center at 3, -5 that has a radius of 7. Right? So remember that the center is HK. Right? The way that you can kind of remember where they go as well is that the X part of the center, right, is going to go over by the X. Right? So it's going to go where the H is. You can also label the Y part, that's where it's going to go next to the Y. Right? Instead of labeling them X and Y, however, it might be more helpful to label them H and K. Right, last but not least, we've got our radius of 7. And what we're going to do is we're going to throw together an equation. And honestly, once you kind of get the hang of it, there's really not a whole lot of like mathiness going on. We're just kind of throwing stuff in. And so what I'm going to have is I'm going to have X minus H, which was 3, squared. I then have to add on Y minus K, which was -5 squared. And then on the other side, that's going to equal the radius, which was 7, squared. Right, so there's a couple little things that we can do to fine-tune this, right? One of which is that you might notice that I have y minus -5, right? So if you remember back to when you learned about slope, which seems like forever ago now, I know, right? When we've got a double negative going on, we've got to be real careful. Right? We can turn that into just one big plus, right? So we can turn that into looking like y plus 5. Right? As for that 7 squared on the end, right, we could just replace that with what it is. 7 squared is 49. Right? That's really all there is to this, right? We're not really doing anything super fancy. We're just saying, like, all right, what do we got? We got a center and we've got a radius, right? Plug them in where they're supposed to go, do a little bit of fine-tuning stuff there, and then we're good. That's it. All right, let's try another one out. We want to write the equation of a circle with center -9, 4, and a diameter of 10. And so something to be a little careful with on this one. So we've got the center, it's H and K. And then this one gives us a diameter of 10. Alright, so if the diameter is 10, that means that the radius is half of that, which is 5. Alright, so be careful what type of information it gives you. You want the radius squared at the end of the equation. Alright, so same kind of deal, right? We're going to have x minus h, which in this case is -9. We're going to throw a squared on there. We'll also have y minus k, which is just 4. Oops. We'll throw a squared on that. And then on the other side, we need to take the radius and square that. Okay. So similar to the last one, right? You might notice with the x's, right? X minus -9, you can turn that into x plus 9. Cool. As for that 5 squared, we can turn that into 25. Okay. So you might notice, right, what I was talking about a little bit up here with this note, right? The negatives make things look like the opposite of what they actually are. Right? And that's going to get important when we're talking about graphs of these things. So whereas on this last problem we just did, my h was -9, it looks like +9, right? If I had written this all, like typed it out and everything, it would just look like regular x plus 9 in parentheses squared. But in reality, the h is actually -9. Right? Same thing for the k. It looks like it's supposed to be 4, but it looks like -4. Right? So don't get tricked. Okay. Something we can also do is we can take a look at it based on a graph. Right? So if I want to write the equation of a circle from a graph, I need a couple things. Right? First things first is I'm going to figure out where the center is. And so it's a little bit hard to tell on here, but these are, oops. Let's see if we can draw a better line than that. That's my y-axis, this is my x-axis, just to kind of bold them a little bit, make it a little bit easier. Alright, and then I'm just trying to find the center. Oh, the center is where the middle is. And that point looks like it's at, this one's going to be a little bit tricky, it's at 4, -2. Right? You might be saying to yourself, like, what? Why is it? That looks like 2, -1. Ah, the scale seems to be jumping by 2 every time. Right? So each little box is going to take care of 2. But anyway, we're finding the center, right? Whether that be, a little bit trickier on some of them than the others, that's all we're really doing. Find out what the center point is. We then need to figure out what the radius is. So, generally speaking, what you can do is you start from the center, and you're just counting out to a side, right? You're trying to get to the edge. In this case, it actually does give us a little bit of a point there. It's a little hard to see, I know, but it does give us one. Oh, everybody say hello to Lulu. She's mad that I'm not petting her. Okay. Yeah, okay. Goodbye. So now what we've got is it took 3 little hops here, right? And we were just talking about how each little box is 2. So it's 2, 4, 6. My radius is 6. After that, for the equation, same thing as what we were just doing, right? It's x minus the h squared plus y minus the k squared equals the radius squared. And again, we've got a couple little things we can touch up here and there, right? That can turn into y plus 2. That 6 squared can turn into 36. All right. So again, same idea, just a little bit different, taking it from a graph. And let's try another one of those ones out. So again, first things first is we got to find the center. Well, bam, there it is. Right? Oftentimes, it'll give you what the center is, or else it's a little bit hard to figure out. And so in this case, it looks like all my boxes are just jumping by 1, so nothing funky going on there. So the center point looks like it's at 1 or -1, 2. Right, as for the radius, right, again, I'm just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, it's like 5.5 maybe. Yeah, let's cheat the numbers a little bit. Let's go with 5. Right? The examples I'm going to give you, or the problems I'm going to give you rather, aren't going to make you kind of fudge the numbers at all. But let's assume that that radius is 5. If we had it as like 5.6, you could just square 5.6 with the calculator, but you know, same idea. As for the equation, same old deal, right? If it helps, sometimes what I like to do is I like to set up a little skeleton for it, kind of like this. I know it's not Halloween, but it can still be a little spooky. And then that way, all I have to do is just throw the numbers in, right? That's the x part of the center. This is the y part of the center. This is where the radius goes. Right? We do our little bit of cleaning up, right? It's x plus 1. 5 squared is 25. And that's it. That's all we gotta get through on this one. Okay. So the other type of problem that we might have is where it's trying to have you pull the information back out of an equation, right? So we took a look at how to write the equation. Now we're going to look at how to undo it. So for this one, we're asked, what is the center and radius of the circle? With the equation x minus 6 squared plus y plus 9 squared equals 64. All right, so a couple different things. All right, I'm going to zoom in on there. We know that the h is over there. We know that the k is with the y, and we know that the r is somewhere over at the end. Whoops. It's having me write in just white marker, erasing everything. So that's one way to handle it. It's just, whoop. You just say, oh no, all our problems are gone. That's why math is great. It solves all your problems. All right, so we need a couple things, right? We need the center, and we also need the radius. And so this is where the tricky part that I've been talking about kind of really kicks you in the face. When we're finding the center HK, right, it's, again, that subtraction sign is supposed to be here, right? It's part of the equation, like the baseline equation, which means that our h is just 6, right? So you can do is you can kind of take the opposite of what it looks like, right? It looks like minus 6. We'll take plus 6. Meanwhile, the k looks like positive 9. Let's take negative 9. Right? So our center for this triangle is, this circle is actually 6, negative 9. Right? As for the radius, right, we know that the radius squared equals 64. Right? So what we can do is we can just take the square root of both sides, and that'll give us the regular radius. Right? So the square root of 64 is plus or minus 8, right? You may have learned about plus or minus last time you took a look at radicals, right? Negative 8 times negative 8 also gives you 64. However, when we're talking about radius, there's really only one answer that makes sense here, right? You can't have a circle with a radius of negative 8. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we can just call it 8, right? The radius is 8. Right? That's all we need out of there. All right, let's take a look at a couple more. So same type of problem, right? We got x squared plus y plus 5 squared equals 100. All right, so again, for the center, we're going to be taking a look at h and k. So we're already at a bit of a problem, right? There is no because normally we'd have like, oh yeah, it's x minus h with a squared. But there's nothing next to x, it's just x squared on its own. All right, well, let me let you in on a little secret. Right? Imagine for a second that I had x minus 0 squared. Well, x minus 0 is just x. And you don't need those parentheses, so that's just x squared. Right, so if you ever have an equation for a circle and it doesn't have anything next to the x or sometimes next to the y, you can assume that that part is just 0, right? Because that's how that would kind of work out as the way we just looked at. Right, so my h part of my center is just 0. As for the k, it's over by the y, right? It looks like plus 5, so we're actually going to grab negative 5. Right? If that one's a little bit tricky, right? Imagine this, right? Y plus 5 squared. If we were writing it out as a regular problem, right? Say we were going the other direction like we started off with, our answer might have something like that. And then we would turn it into a plus sign. Right? So this is where we get that negative 5 from, is that it's y minus, that's supposed to be there, and then the k is that negative 5 right after it. Okay. Cool, so the center's done. all we need is the radius. Right? So again, the radius squared is equal to 100. So to figure out what the regular old radius is, I need to take the square root of both sides. And what that's going to tell me is that the radius is just 10. And so we're pretty lucky that all these square roots are coming out really nicely, right? You could have, a situation where you need to like take the square root of 10 or something like that. So, we've used Google Calculator back when we were learning about right triangle trigonometry. Right, so there is a little button on there for radical, right? It just looks like, or it might not even have that little top part on it. Right? Or what you can do is right in your browser, you could just type in square root, and then we could put in 100 in parentheses, hit enter, and it should tell you what the square root of 100 is, right? If you needed to figure out the square root of 47, you could plug it in just like that. Squirt, parentheses 47, will tell you what that's going to be. It should be something like 6.8. Anyway, last little bit here. Right, same kind of idea. Trying to find the center and the radius. Right, so for the center, again, what we're doing is we're taking a look at the h and the k. Right, so the h would be over here. Oops. Let's see if we can color code that a little better. And then the k is somewhere over by the y. Right, leaving that radius for the end. And so just like we've been talking about, right? That's x plus 7. Right? So because it looks like plus 7, the h is actually going to be the opposite, negative 7. Right? Same thing is happening with the k as it was with the h on the last problem. Right? There's nothing with that y. So we can just call it 0. Right? As for the radius, right, r squared is equal to 144. Right? Take the square root of both sides. Or if you want to, you could call it the squirt, and that's a little bit more fun. The radius is just 12. Okay. One way that you can double check your work on these, right, is, pretend after you figure out your center and your radius that you're working on, that you didn't have that original equation. Pretend you just had the center and the radius. And then work through it like one of the problems that we started off with. Right? I'll give myself a little skeleton here. Right. So my radius was 12. We'll throw that 12 in there. My h was negative 7. And my k was 0. Right? So if I go ahead and I simplify things down in here, right, that turns into x plus 7. That radius part turns into a solid 144. And then we can go even a little bit further, right? This can stay as x plus 7 with a squared. And then this y minus 0, well, y minus 0 is just y. And when you've got just the one thing, you don't need the parentheses. So we'll just have y squared. All right? Well, would you look at that? We ended up where we started, right? Which means that, as long as I'm doing everything the right way and putting it in the right spot, that is the center and radius we're looking for, right? Not something you need to do on every problem, right? But if you do want to check your work, that is a way you can do it. And I'm sorry to say that is it. I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you have a great summer. Thanks for listening to me throughout all of this craziness. And I'll catch you next time.